A fighter pilot, a 747 captain, and a chief flight instructor. No, that's not the beginning of a joke. That is the huge career of Frank Kennedy. And he is going to be right here with us in just a minute answering questions that you sent us through Facebook. Before we dive into the interview, I would like to take this second and thank all of you who subscribe to this channel. Your support makes it easier for me to create more interviews, more 360-degree videos, as well as more instructional videos for you to enjoy. If you're not yet subscribed to this channel, please consider doing so and click the notification button so you'll know when the next video comes out. And without any further delay, let's fasten those seatbelts and hear what Frank Kennedy has to say about your questions. Hello everyone and welcome to another interview. Today we have a very special guest with us, Frank Kennedy, who I know as the chief flight instructor in Navy Annapolis Flight Center, but primarily was a Marine Corps fighter pilot and a retired 747 captain. We have a lot of questions that came in from all of you over Facebook, and I'm very much looking forward to hear what Frank has to say about all of this. And without further ado, Frank Kennedy, welcome and thank you for joining. And if you don't mind telling us a little bit about yourself and a short overview of your career.
No, the pleasure to be with you. I'm presently under house arrest under this virus situation we're in because of some critical medical things, and I can't get out of the house. So this is a great opportunity for me to expand my horizons, as they say. Myself, I guess aviation-wise, started flying with my grandfather at a very early age, probably about 8 or so. He modified a Super Cub, and I can remember flying out with him to the outer islands down in Biloxi, Mississippi, and we would do a little surf fishing and that kind of stuff, and then come back home. And that was my introduction to aviation. Fell in love with it right off the bat, and went from there to go to college, and we were doing something useful called law school, but I found out there was a aviation course at what was then Louisiana Polytechnic Institute. Went there, majored in aviation, and went on to spend my summers crop dusting in a place called Monroe, Louisiana. That was a lot of fun. Enjoyed it. And from there, went into a little bit of private business. I found out I liked flying a whole lot more, but even though I did buy an airplane, a personal airplane at the time, a Beechcraft Bonanza, and said, yeah, let's try flying. So what was the neatest kind of flying to do? Well, that would be a little fighter plane. So I joined something called the United States Marine Corps, and for the next 20 some odd years, managed to stay in the cockpit almost all the time, flying the Harrier aircraft, and then the A4, and then later back to the more modern Harrier, which is still flying now, I think. Retired from that, went to 747s, became a CFI about 1980 or so. And, as I like to say, I became too old and too fat and too bald-headed to stay where I wanted to be. So I had to move on to the next airplane, and I retired from all those ambitions to become the chief flight instructor at the so-called Navy Annapolis Flight Center. I think I got their t-shirt on.
Yeah, you do. Yeah, you got it.
There it is.
Yep. So we have a lot of questions that came from different aviation groups on Facebook. And we'll start with the first one, which is related to the COVID-19 crisis. When will the impact of COVID-19 on the general aviation start to wind down, and how do you see the market for new pilots in the next maybe 5 years?
If you're following the stock market, I think that in the passenger loads, I think that wind down has already started with the opening up of the economy. This was probably, as a lot of guys tell me, much larger impact than even 9/11 was on the aviation industry. But I think once there's a vaccine for this stuff, I think we as creatures of habit are probably going to return back to flying in airplanes by taking long car rides someplace with the family all together in one small unit for 10 hours a day, whatever. But I think those vacations are still going to go. We're still going to want to go visit grandma. we're still going to want to take vacations to exotic places. We're still going to want the convenience that 600 knot or 600 mile an hour transportation mode to get there. So I don't think it's going to go away. I think if anything, the pent up emotions that everyone has is probably going to want them to get out even more. And I think we're starting to see that. As far as a pilot demand, again, we're haven't figured out a way. You can take a look at me and figure that out. We haven't figured out a way yet to turn the clock back. So guys are still turning 65. They're still having to retire, and an awful lot of the airlines in this process have actually offered early outs for people so they can retire early. And I think what you're going to wind up with is a much larger pilot shortage than you had before you even walked into this scenario. So if a guy's having a problem about thinking there's going to be a demand for pilots, I don't think that's true. I think the naysayers who are saying that are probably not doing a 360-degree examination of exactly what's going to happen here in the future. So, but it is a guess of the future. So I would say if you are pursuing that based upon demand, then you should launch into it.
Cool. That's great. And subsequently, another COVID-19 question has to do with pilot training. As a chief instructor in the flight school, have you seen any decline or increase, for that matter, in pilot training during the pandemic?
I think initially in the school, and I'm one example of that, as I said, I'm confined to quarters due to a medical situation in my family, not personally, but with my wife. So that effect initially hit everybody, where everybody pretty much says, oh my God, we don't know what this is. And I would say the flying at the flight school was probably curtailed by at least 90%. I think as we're figuring out what the risk factors are here, just as you do in any aviation pursuit, we're figuring out that we can, in fact, do it safely. We're figuring out that, yes, we can continue with our training, and people are coming back. And I would venture to say, even in Maryland, with still being just in a stage 2, we are probably back to, my guess would be about 70%, short of the over 70 guys who, such as myself, were restricted from flying. So it's been a pretty quick recovery, I think, both for the airline industry itself and for flight training. So,
cool.
I don't see any impediments right now.
Hopefully the trend continues and we keep everything going back to normal.
Right.
As it relates to flight training, putting aside the really big schools like ADP and all the the stuff that you get emails from and commercials, talking about flight school more the size of Navy Annapolis Flight Center, the question came in, is there any way for a student pilot to finance their flight training, and why is it so hard to find financing, especially for the smaller schools?
As far as the Navy Annapolis Flight Center is concerned, there's a number of sources of financing. A lot of companies do it professionally. You have to go online and find that. But my strongest recommendation is that you do it through an education process. And there's a school here known as, we call it CCBC, which is the Community College of Baltimore County. And they have a flight program, and it's a beautiful program. They can work out financing. Veterans, of course, would get full veteran financing all the way through their entire course. So there are avenues out there that can help you get that. I think the easiest way to get it is with getting, like a student loan in that regard, and financing it through those programs. And again, you wind up, essentially with a college degree, and you're probably in a cockpit as a commercial pilot by the time you're 21, which is very expedient. And hopefully shortly after that, a 4-year degree, which is pretty much required in the industry now.
We have a question from someone who is in his 30s, and he's wondering whether it's too late to start flight training, and would height be any kind of a consideration?
The cockpit size obviously has something to do with what's going on. I mean, if the guy's 7 feet 5 inches tall, he may have to find a larger cockpit for him to sit in. But the seats have adjustment. The height thing should be overcome in the normal training aircraft that we have, which are like the 172s, and of course the Piper series aircraft. They're pretty adjustable to anything that's, I would say, under 6'6", something of that nature. If you're taller than that, it may start to have an impact, but shouldn't be that bad. Age, I had a guy that was 75 years old. He was a retired dentist, and he celebrated his 50th wedding anniversary, his 75th birthday, and his first solo flight on the same day. Incredible. As far as making a career of the airlines is concerned, 65 is the mandatory retirement. The pilot shortage is short enough now that if you're in your 50s, they would probably hire you on for sure. Commuters would probably hire you on, even if you had the hours and the experience, they'd probably hire you on at 60. So,
wow.
And of course, if you're over 65, you can always come see me, and I can get you a job as a CFI.
That's always good. We do have I remember in our school, John Sullivan. He's quite up there, right? How old is he?
Yes, John Sullivan is 87 years old. He's still a check pilot with us. He is a Korean War veteran with 21 air medals, and was, if it hadn't been for a medical issue that he had, he probably would have been one of our famous astronauts. He's quite a celebrity, and as I say, 87 and still flight instructing and good enough at it that he's a check pilot. So remarkable.
Fantastic. I had a check.
Yeah, I'm hoping for the same thing.
I'm sure it will happen.
We're getting blood transfusions weekly.
That's great. All right, so let's transition a little bit. This is a very interesting question. If you can talk a little bit about the business side of running a flight school.
The bad news part of that is it takes you out of the cockpit, which I really don't like. Running a flight school is, you have to have a little bit of a business background, I guess. You have to be able to make the the income slightly ahead of the expenses. You have to manage your maintenance programs, unless you're a large enough school to have people to handle that for you. But it's flying airplanes is a lot more fun than trying to run a business. I'll leave it at that. So if I had my way, I'd be 30 years old again and sitting in a single seat aircraft, seeing how close I could get to the sound barrier by sitting behind a desk. That's not what I'm looking for, but it's part of it. So you have to do it well. I totally enjoy seeing people come through and develop new skills. For me, flying's been a lifelong passion. It's I was very lucky. I got the right job and I got the right girl, and it all worked out very nicely for me. But the bottom line on that is seeing folks come in and sharing that passion for flight that I have with them, and seeing their skills develop, and them becoming not just pilots, but very good pilots, very safe pilots, very competent and knowledgeable pilots. And for the young guys, I guess everyone's pretty much younger than I am now, but for the younger guys, seeing them mature into aviation and go on and leading extraordinarily successful lives, it's very nice to see. That's very pleasant for me. At my age, I think that's what we do, is try to pass whatever skills we have on to, a following generation, or generations in this case. And, that's a remarkable experience. Remarkable.
Awesome. So we touched earlier a little bit on the financing of flight training. And another financial related question would be if you have any advice for student pilots as to how they can maximize their investments and reduce the overall cost of flight training.
There's a number of things that follow into that, and is that for the amount of time that you have that you're actually paying for that airplane or paying for that flight instructor, you want that maximized. Obviously, picking a very, very good school is first. Second is picking a very, very good flight instructor who can get across to you stuff. But even more important is, and pilots really have to have this, is you need to understand individual responsibility and the ability to embrace that and to discharge that responsibility in a very, very good fashion. And I mean by that, you have to come to each flight lesson fully prepared, not only academically, but as functionally complete as you possibly can before you even show up. And what does that mean? That means things like chair flying or studying the flows of a procedure as far as, where your muscle memory goes. Such as if you play an instrument like maybe a violin, it takes hours and hours of practice to get that flow of your notes and the sounding of it down just properly. And in an airplane, it's no different. You have to understand and you have to have muscle memory of where to go with both thought patterns and with your hands and the decision-making process that you go through. They pretty much all need to be rehearsed before you get into the environment. And that would be the key element as far as being able to maximize your dollar return on your investment, because you can get your private pilot licenses in as little as 35 hours, but I've known people that took over 100 hours to get their private pilot license. Now, they later became great pilots, but it took them a while to get there. You can shorten that curve, that learning curve, by spending a lot of time at it. And it's not just academic, it's also functional. And that's the key word in aviation. Academics are like a foundational element, and the functional part of it is the actual edifice. So if they can follow those courses, I think that would maximize their dollar, not only their dollar return, but also their abilities as pilots, because they would have those neuron paths down so that they had more room in their brain housing group there to think about what they really do need to do. So it's a complementary process. It not only saves you money, it makes you a better pilot, it makes you safer, and it gives you the ability to think through issues that otherwise you may be involved thinking about something else, which you shouldn't be.
So the next question is, again, flight school related. Has to do with the different parts, because we can train under 61 or 141. And which do you find more beneficial? What's the pros and cons of each one of those?
By far and away, the 141 school is a primary recommendation, because it's a regulated and structured school. And once you learn the regulations and the structure, there's an ultimate freedom from being three-dimensional, which is hard to explain on the ground, but it is the ultimate freedom I've ever experienced. But the regimentation that is required to get to that point is mandatory. You're not going to get that necessarily from a Part 61 school, because a Part 61 school, a guy can be a CFI and go out and buy himself a beat up old airplane, and he can open up a flight school. Under 141, all the maintenance is supervised, all of the instruction is standardized, tailored, of course, to the individual. And the courses themselves are approved by the FAA, and that is monitored and supervised. But if you don't follow that structure, if everyone just tries to maverick it, if you would, then you may not get a complete course of study, and there may be big holes in your learning criteria, even though you may get through a check ride. So my strongest recommendation, if you're going to make aviation something that you want to thoroughly enjoy, that you want to be really, really safe at, and if you want to follow on in the career, is that you find a 141 school with a great reputation, okay? And you then very carefully select your flight instructor.
Is it true that um, airlines prefer seeing people coming from 141 rather than a 61?
I I can neither confirm nor deny, but if I was the owner of the airlines, I'd rather see a 141 person than I would, somebody who had not been trained under a standardized syllabus.
One more question about learning. And I found it very interesting. I didn't expect it, but I'm really curious to know what you have to say about that. What is your experience with students that have learning disabilities?
The thing that is really remarkable about us as human beings is we're very adaptable. Adaptable. We have the capability to have things that may not be as strong as the next person has as far as our abilities are concerned, but we can train to that, and we can develop the best um, abilities that we can. The FAA does not look at learning disabilities as a disqualifier. Now, if you have some sort of serious mental disorder or some diagnosed mental disorder um, that would cause behavioral changes, and there may be something that they want to look at there. But as far as just a learning disability is concerned, you adapt. It may take you twice as long to learn the procedures of flight, but if you have the enthusiasm for it, you'll do that. You'll do what's required. Um, I have, in my entire history of flight instruction, which dates all the way back to 1980, I have met two guys that I felt were not aeronautically adaptable, and I recommend that they do something else. And that's pretty rare.
Mm.
So I think the majority of human beings, as I say, will adapt to those circumstances. And even though, um, they may not be the fastest runner out there, they may be able to run a long distance. So, they'll take what skills they have, they'll adapt those skills in order to meet the requirements. And as again, I say, the FAA looks upon demonstrated ability more so than anything else.
So I gotta tell you, when I posted the questions that were brought up for you on Facebook, I also put one of your pictures under the 747 link that you sent me, and a few people commented about you personally, the people that knew you and were really impressed with your career, and they were very much looking forward to hearing what you have to say. And it sure sounds like you have amassed an incredible amount of experiences and stories. So if you don't mind, maybe sharing a couple with everyone.
I can pick any one of the flights with my grandfather, and as I say to a lot of people, I think my grandfather's still in the cockpit with me every time I go flying. Sort of an emotional thing. But the first solo, that was pretty impressive. I thought that was pretty nice. My first cross country, which I got lost on, I had to. We were in North Louisiana. I had to drop down to a water tower to read the name on the water tower to figure out where I was, what town I was over. That took some explaining when I got back. The 747 was another airplane that, I was fortunate enough to circumnavigate the globe about 150 times. And, part of that flying was meeting cultures and people and finding out a little bit of what this world's all about, and finding out that in large part, it's an incredibly beautiful place. Some of the sights that you've seen, I remember that Forrest Gump movie saying he couldn't figure out where, heaven started and the earth ended, and or words to that effect. And I've been in that picture so many times. It's as far as a career is concerned, again, if I could start all over again, I would do exactly the same thing, exactly the same career. Maybe a couple of mistakes I'd kind of leave on the wayside, but it would be the same career, and I think probably the same girlfriend all the way through to where we are again today.
That's a great answer. So really, I really appreciate you taking the time to answer all of these questions for everyone. I'm sure they will learn a lot.
Well, thank you very much. And for all those who are thinking about this, dream large, dream large. It is indeed a beautiful life, and at least give it a great stab. And again, the right school, the right instructors, and the proper dedication. And I think you'll find a pleasure and a freedom from life that's known by very few.
Excellent.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Frank.
Bye bye now.